Hello, everybody. Very happy to have another young Indian with us, part of the Voice of the Young series. Right now, we have with us Alan David Simon. Let's listen to him. Over to you, Alan.
Very good evening to everyone. And I'm very thankful to Master Sir for this opportunity to be a part of his Young Voices series. I'm Alan David Simon. I'm at the moment a MA Political Science student at St. Xavier's College, Autonomous Kolkata, which is affiliated with the University of Calcutta. And I'm also serving as a postgraduate researcher as well as the academic projects coordinator for the International Association of Political Science Students, which is hosted at the Concordia University in Quebec. And I'm also a fellow with the Future of India Foundation on the Pehli program, which is an ethnographic study of the first generation students across Indian universities, mostly in tier one cities. And with that, I would say that would be my basic introduction. But as a person who is very enthusiastic and has been engaged in multiple research with multiple research organizations and in multiple research projects over a course of the last year. Um, I have been centering my focus in academic life as well as my own career towards academic research, mostly in the field of Asian studies, with most of my focus being on South Asian politics and political culture. I'm a published commentator with quite a few journal articles as well as the news media articles analyzing what I genuinely have termed as the post-colonial Asian studies of political culture. And that entire sense of having a post-coloniality is very essential to being a South Asian at the same time. And understanding post-coloniality gives such a pleasure of understanding so many mundane things in life that can become so political from time to time, especially with how we see politics as well as the political economy, the culture of how human behavior has been changing over time, especially in the 21st century, especially with the global south coming into order. And with that, I would mostly focus on my niche topic of post-coloniality in South Asia and its impact on political culture. And towards that, I think it's very important to understand, India as a part of the larger South Asian region and the region as a whole. Um, Understanding South Asia has never been very easy, especially because Indians and most academic scholars have always pushed a very India-centric view of South Asia, especially as you have, the American Center of Knowledge, mostly in the University of Chicago, being, fielded in the 1960s, and area studies coming up as a very important lineage from political studies, and the necessity of area studies during the Cold War period to ensure the American supremacy against the Soviet influence that was battling in Asia at the time. And area studies with itself brought a lot of interesting and nuanced understanding of regions and meta regions, how we understand people not only as political entities, as citizens within their constrained borders, but also as people having certain common tendencies and having certain common behavior patterns across borders. And that has been a very interesting part of South Asia, that South Asia has been a creation of a very minute amount of time. The nation state that were created in 1947 were far more a political exercise than a natural or a spontaneous cohabitation. So nation state and the nation building experience in South Asia has much more being a construct, and a construct at that within a span of a few years and by a very small elite, rather than being engaging in terms of its natural continuities and discontinuities. And you see the 1947 borders, and you see the lines that were drawn, and you see that ethnic divisions that were not part of any imagination prior to that being somehow sorted, somehow resolved, sometimes collaborated into, sometimes walked over into. A very good example is how the forced migration of 1947 worked, where you had Muslim families as well as Hindu families cohabiting the same piece of land for ages without any discrimination. And there, all of a sudden, you have a border, and they were expected to be living on different sides of that border. And the interesting patterns of migration that arose from that gave rise to far more problems than to solutions in its own right. You might have a two-nation theory from Muhammad Iqbal and then propagated by the Muslim League of Jinnah, but nevertheless, you do not have a practical solution when you have Muslims coming from, say, UP or our, the different kingdoms that inhabited UP, our even Bengali Muslims migrating towards Western Pakistan, and you do not have a sense of integration happening at the same time. The entire series of conflict that South Asia has seen has been a post-partition creation, and these human flows which have never been addressed fully or even been addressed at all at times. And you would see that very cross-cutting nature of culture being forced into certain boxes, especially with the nation building process that India, as well as its own neighbors, have seen. Most of the nation states that came about in 1947, in their orientation towards the Westphalian model, became nation states with a homogenizing identity. If you go on and ask any Pakistani and how Pakistani foreign policy has developed over time, a basic answer as to who is a Pakistani would probably be that he's certainly not an Indian. He's Pakistani because he's not an Indian. And that answers quite a lot of the problems that South Asia faces as a region at the moment. And that entire problem of having exclusivist, exclusionary national identities, sometimes with minorities within these nation states not being able to find a cohesive identity, which is sometimes pushed towards the mainstream, pushed towards the majoritarian view, is a problem that South Asia continues to face. And that destiny has kept on challenging South Asia and South Asian peace uh, from 1947 onwards, certainly. For example, the creation of Bangladesh. Now, Bangladesh has been a very relatively newer entity in South Asia compared to the other states. And you have an interesting view of understanding Bangladeshi national identity, especially in the post Hasina period. I write an interesting article for the Ramjas Political Review where I question these identities and I question how that debate has come along its own right and how it has gone and a complete 180 in its orientation. You have 1971, the Bangladesh War of Liberation, where the atrocities by West Pakistani army in Bangladesh, the genocide, the after effects of a very brutal cyclone, a war on Bengalis itself results in the movement for independence and it tips with the movement for independence. What for decades was simply a language autonomy movement becomes a full blown national independence movement under Mujibur Rahman. And by the time you have the 1971 independence, you have a national identity which is created, which is secular in its orientation because it finds certain questions difficult to answer. For example, who is this Bangladeshi? If Bangladesh is to be a nation state, they must define their own national identity. But who would be a Bangladeshi? If a Bangladeshi would necessarily mean a Muslim, then what is the necessity of of division from Pakistan itself? What is the cause of 1971? And if a Bangladeshi is a Bengali, then what was the original cause of partition in 1947? And you have such questions coming up again and again and with leaders and national leaders trying to interpret it in their own ways and trying to define it in own ways. Mujibur somehow gives a very secular definition of it and goes ahead and portrays a very secular form of a Bengali nation that is distinct from India, but certainly a Bengali nation nevertheless. By the time Ziaul Rahman comes to power, you have the redefinition of this Bengali nation into something that is both Bengali and Muslim, something that is different from both West Bengal in India as well as distinct from the West Pakistan that they have come out of. And that is the entire dilemma of the South Asian region, how to define itself. And the definition of itself certainly is the negation of its own neighbor. And if being a Pakistani means not to be an Indian, if being a Bangladeshi means neither to be Pakistani, not to be an Indian, the entire query of how to have a region that is cooperating within itself. The failure of SARC is one of the most important backgrounds to this. When you have national identities that do not portray or are not mutually inclusivist of each other, especially because populations in South Asia are never into pockets. They were never one thing, and they were never segmented into ghettos. If you just look at how Ahmedabad or even Surat is portrayed, you do not have extreme riots in such cities, especially because communities are very well integrated, having economic relations between them. When you have different communities having strong economic ties and economic dependencies on each other, you do not get to see a tense sort of communalism which otherwise characterizes segmented societies. And India and the Indian subcontinent has never had such forms of ghettoization where clear cut population divides were seen. And that sense of integration and that sense of having cross border affinities. For example, a good example would be how Myanmar and the northeast of India has been entangled over a long period of time. You have the northeastern tribes who were originally either movers from across the Arakan Mountains in Myanmar or have cross border ties with other tribes, similar tribes in Myanmar. And that has been a cause of great debate within New Delhi and New Delhi circles because of its intangible consequences, especially the porous border that we share with Myanmar, with militants getting homage, militants being able to smuggle in armaments, even the drug trade that has continued through the borders between India and Myanmar have been a great cause of concern. Human movements are never it's never a line that can divide human movements, especially because human flows do not go on to say that political entities are the be all and end all of what I can cohabit, what identities I can identify with, what affinities I can have with other communities that may be across the border. And so human movements and human flows and human identities have certainly been a problem of the South Asian regionalism, and that is why nation states have been forced towards a more homogenizing identity. And in that homogenizing identity, they have found their own problems of addressing minorities. A good example can be brought from anywhere. For example, Bangladesh. The moment you go on to define Bangladesh as uh, both a Bengali and a Muslim nation, what about communities that are not Bengali or not Muslim? For example, the Hojongs and the Chakmas in the Chittagong Hill tribes. You have a segment of population which is completely left out of the identity, the national identity that is created. You also have populations such as the Bihari Muslims who found it far more natural to move towards Bangladesh than to go towards West Pakistan at that point of time when the partition was undergoing. And this community has been seen to be far more, in gloves and hands with the West Pakistani army administration, and due to which post independent Bangladesh has been characteristically marginalizing Bihari Muslims in Bangladesh. And that sense of marginalizing certain communities within that homogenizing efforts of the nation state has been a constant problem in South Asia, a constant problem that also defines its regionalism. The failure of SARC, be it just because of Pakistan and India conflict, would have been solvable, especially if you have certain other regional, sub-regional combinations like BBIM, for example, or you have the very entire segmentation of having India-centric but India-led regional organizations without minus Pakistan. But nevertheless, these regional problems keep coming up and keep coming up in big ways, especially because of India's hesitancy towards accepting regionalism as a solution to a lot of South Asian problems. If you just look at the South Asian map, I think the most blatant thing that comes out is the asymmetry that the region sees. 80% of the landfall is in India. India is larger than life looming over South Asia. And the other states that inhabit South Asia are quite small, do not have the economic heft to compete with India. And a very interesting fact about South Asia would be that all of these South Asian states only share borders with India rather than with each other, which leaves them far more susceptible to competition and conflict with India rather than with anyone else. And that is why you have so many border disputes involving India and these smaller states, be it with the Tista River, be it enclaves and exclaves in Bangladesh. You have problems with Nepal, especially with the previous government, the CPIM government with Oli at the head of Nepal. You have problems with China. You have problems with Pakistan. You have problems at times with how Afghanistan and Pakistan relations are shaping on. And you have problems even down south with Maldives and Sri Lanka, especially. And moreover, these problems are highlighted because of India's and a criticism that India has faced from these South Asian states is the entire attitude of being a big brother in the region. The interventionist attitude that India has had towards these states have made a very problematic blow, especially as the region keeps churning over time. And certainly by the time it comes to the 21st century, you have giants like that of USA and China playing a hedging role in the region, where these smaller states are far more reliant on outer powers, external powers to balance off India's influence in the region. Be it the very famous string of pearls strategy that China has used with its Belt and Road Initiative, being able to grant it access to certain ports, strategic ports in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, as well as in Pakistan. And the entire anti-India sentiment that has brewed over time across these South Asian states, not only in Pakistan. Pakistan may be a territorial rivalry along with a lot of history of conflict, but the anti-India sentiment sits with almost every other smaller state in South Asia. Be it Bangladesh, where the Hasina regime and its anti-democratic practices were completely neglected by India. There was no sense of criticism that came from the Indian government's end, and that has resulted in a post-Hasina association of India with a regime that was authoritarian in its orientation towards its own citizens, and that has led to a lot of other divides that were fostered. And with public diplomacy not being very able to mull over these relations and calm the sentiments down, the entire sense of India being an interventionist state trying to play a big brother in the region has continued in multiple of these states. Be it Sri Lanka during the Sri Lankan civil war, you have instances where the LTT and the Sinhalese led Sri Lankan government, they go on for a ceasefire just to push India out, and they continue with their civil war. And these instances of having an Indian intervention that does not turn out well for India has been a very problematic stance in South Asia, especially because these smaller nations have had expectations that India will step in whenever there is a need to step in the region, whereas they also expect that India will not intervene in internal domestic politics, despite the problems that India would be facing at different points of time. A very recent example will be the economic crisis in Sri Lanka, where Indian bailouts were necessitated, and India was applauded for rolling the bank check. But nevertheless, you would have similar sentiments of anti-India coming off in different states at different point of time. Be it the blockade of Nepal in 1998 and then 2014, where there was a problem with India blocking off borders and stopping essential supplies to Nepal due to its hostile stances, and you know Kathmandu growing closer and closer with Beijing. Be it a problem of military intervention in the Maldives, where the Indian military and the Indian Navy, to be specific, had to intervene in certain circumstances of domestic upheaval. And so India's neighborhood has been a very problematized future for India, and also gives a sense of impending as well as immediate security threats to India as a whole. And these churn out from the very base national identities that play exclusion to itself. And when you have national identities that are not mutually inclusive, rather exclusionary, you turn out to have nation states that are always in competition with each other. And when these competitions reach critical mass, you have conflicts, and you see that especially in asymmetric warfare that has been adopted by most of these states, be it in the way of supporting separatists in India, or even allowing porous borders to dictate drug trade as well as trafficking in arms and humans. And that has been a problem that South Asia has been facing, and a problem that South Asia continues to face and a challenge that needs to be seen head on, mostly as a problem of regional integration rather than anything else. This challenge is compounded by the nature of South Asia as a post-colony, something that as I say, post-colonial South Asia is not the same as looking at South Asia simply as a structure, simply as a combination of states. Post-colonial South Asia has a lot to do with history and certainly a lot to do with political culture that these seven states have had and continue to have over time. We of course know that we have a British colonial experience, and that colonial experience also continues to shape a lot of the political culture and the political behavior of people in these states. A very good example would be how Parker Chatterjee talks about the segmentation of the Indian polity, the segmentation of the Indian polity into very distinct societies, the political society and the civil society. We have urban centric, university educated, middle classes who are mostly political activists and they find voices in stages of power. And nevertheless, these classes are the ones that determine law and the policy as well as the policy agenda. Nevertheless, the civil society is at its limitation, a minute class within South Asia, because these civil societies, despite their weight, are very small minorities within the larger political society that exists. And if I could borrow from something that Archie Mbembe, a very famous scholar from post-colonial studies in Africa, suggests that the post-colony is a problematic stance, especially because you do not have a uniform society. You do not have consensus amongst people as to whether or not these are the games, these are the rules of the games that we play by. Especially because the political society is divided into multiple spaces of publics. These are publics that define very different things at very different points of time. A very good and a very banal example would be tea stall politics in India. How middle-aged, generally male persons who are already engaged in family and have reached either mid career or are at least marginally well off into the middle classes. They determine their tea discussions with politics and how every tea stall discussion becomes a criticism of the authority. And despite it being very mundane, these are one of the very interesting forms of how dissent comes out in these post-colonial states, especially when you see how post-colonial states themselves borrow a lot from the colony, borrow a lot from the colonial heritage, where the state is only able to show its existence through use of violence and the institutionalization of violence and the regularization of violence, be it in terms of identification of citizens. Kavirajan does a very interesting study of how census, which is at the end of the day a very mathematical, a very technical process, has become politicized in India. While its numbers may be very rational, very empirical, the politics behind it is especially how the narratives of a census can be used. Caste census has become such an enormous topic of debate and discussion, not because it's simply about numbers, but because numbers mean electoral dividends in post-colonial democracies. And this has been put through a lot of stress, especially because, as I said, these post colonies do not have a singular consensus-driven society. They are separate, multiple, divided publics, which are often segmented into its own cohorts. So you have interest groups that are cross-cutting. You have interest groups that are conflicting. You have interest groups that are often competing against each other for influence, for dividends from the policy agencies, and that creates a sense of politics that is beyond simply democratic politics, politics that is well beyond just electoral politics. And that is where you see a very interesting understanding of how Indian politics has also shaped up. The interesting way of the politics of the road, the politics of protest, where everything ends up with a protest because debate does not originate from the houses of parliament, but rather on the streets. You would see that MPs so often come out and would speak on the street rather than debate in the house floor. And that politics of the street has been something that has defended and determined these post colonies, especially because post colonial consensus is not available in houses of parliament, in the legislative bodies. Rather, it is much more a discussion of how to be able to have a politics that can be visible, that can be agencyfying, that can be visualized, that can be voiced at the banal level, at the level of the mundane, at the level of the people. And that has been a problem, and a very interesting problem at that for Indian politics and South Asian politics at large. That these separate publics, these separate public spaces, these segmented populations, these conflicting interest groups, they do not often seem to find the consensus. They don't even happen to find a national identity that they can coalesce under. And when you have so many interest groups that are competing against each other, you have an interesting way of coming up with national identities that are completely segmented off and completely different from each other. If you just look at the national leaders in the Indian national movement, you will find that what Mahatma Gandhi's imagination of the Indian nation is, and what Nehru's eventual justification for the Indian nation is completely separate. And that imagination of nationhood, that imagination of nation building is something so that so deteriorated, so distorted, so segmented by the imaginations of people particular and segments of population particular, that nobody has consensus over what exactly India is, what exactly South Asia is. A person might not be able to even go on to give a very good definition of what an Indian can be, especially because national leaders themselves have never had a consensus amongst themselves as to what the Indian nation is, be it during the Indian national movement or even after it. Whether constitutionalism has brought a lot of things together into a legal fold is a different question. But nevertheless, identities and the problem with identities have been so far and wide that it's been incessant that these segmented populations, especially in a post-colonial South Asia, have not been able to agree on anything within. And so, while South Asian states, have been compounding on exclusionary national identities against each other, a lot of these states themselves do not have domestic consensus over what their own national identity is. If you just look at, say, a Pakistan, the entire conflict between a democratically elected government as well as the Pakistani military, the conflict between Islamabad and Rawalpindi has been seen as a conflict that is so convivial in nature. And that is something that is very true for South Asian societies. These interest groups, do not happen to have enough pull to unilaterally determine anything, and so they are always kept in a continuous loop of competition. This is something that of course can be extended with something that I believe in economics as well as policy sciences considers to be the group theory, where groups often compete over resources that are always scarce in nature. And so when you have national identities being the bet placed on a nation state, when these interest groups are competing against each other, when they're attempting to define a national identity that is, of course, cohesive towards themselves and gives them the leverage for advantages in that resource allocation by the state, the entire problem being that none of these groups are either large enough or even homogeneous enough within themselves to determine it unilaterally. And therefore, you have an entire position of these small segmented interest groups always having a convivial relationship with each other, where they are mutually exclusivist, always competing, but nevertheless neither is able to outright defeat the other, nor are they able to negate any other standpoint that they might have. And that would be what South Asian politics has largely been dependent on, the convivial nature of social groups who are unable to determine a consensus, especially because no group is able to claim clear and complete dominance against each other. And that has resulted in a very fragmented imagination of what nation state is, what national identities are, and how to react to national identities of neighboring states, especially because neighboring states have also had this problem of trying to and attempting to, especially with India being asymmetrically dominant in South Asia, determine how they want to decide their national identity in exclusion to India, if not exclusion to others as well. And entire that entire underlying political culture that India and South Asia as a whole sees has been problematized, especially because when you do not have any group in society which is dominant enough, you have a relatively autonomous state which is able to decide on things unilaterally. And nation states, especially in South Asia, have been able to do that. Have been able to determine a lot of their policy independently, despite arguments, despite problems, because no civil society or organization, nor is the political society gaining any consensus out of the conflicts that they are having. And while in Western societies we see an overarching consensus over certain basic matters such as democracy, such as something as interesting as civil rights, you would not find a consensus even on civil rights and democracy in India. A very good example would be the Indian middle class, which has been democratizing in its own right. The Indian middle class, post 1990s liberalization, and the new middle class that has been consumerist in its own consumption patterns, that middle class has had tendencies of favoring dictatorship much more than they have had a tendency to democratize. And that entire tendency to even the rise of the new right, especially in the BJP, has been completely backed by the new middle class as well as the older middle class, which have not had a consensus over what democracy for them is. While the nationalist movement might have been led by democratizing middle classes at that point of time, by the time it comes to 1990s, the new right is far more favored by the new middle classes, and you have a continuation of that going into the next paradigm in the 21st century. And so the lack of consensus, even on basic values of group competition, on the basic values of how group interests are determined, on how a nation is to be run, on the national identities, is something that creates a very good niche, and a niche that I have been researching and I can hope to research further as well. And that is the post-coloniality that South Asian studies and South Asian political culture goes through. And I think I'll get it over back to Sir and see if he has any questions further in the discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. It's very refreshing and very educational to listen to you. I have lots of thoughts about it, but I will try to be brief. And but before that, let me say I'm really happy that somebody of your age is focusing on these issues. Okay, they are indeed very important and very powerful issues. Let me preface this by saying that I visualized this Wikipedia channel as a channel for India and its neighbors. But I have found it very difficult to get
Mm,
people from the neighboring countries to come on.
mm,
Zero from Bhutan, zero from Sri Lanka. Though I've tried very hard,
mm,
contacted lots and lots of people, nobody wants to be first. I do have some people from Pakistan and Bangladesh, and one or two from Nepal, but mostly they have studied abroad.
mm,
Okay, so it is very, or they have some strong connections with external organizations. So
right,
it's frustrating me.
mm,
It's very frustrating. Okay, but let me get on to some serious
mm,
points. First of all, I think a young one like you, who is very serious about it, I would say get rid of two terms that you use all the time. First, get rid of post-colonial. The colonial period, strictly speaking, lasted only 90 years, 1857 onwards. And it ran only for 90 years. And by 80th year, 1937 or so, the colonizer had given up. There was no struggle. I mean, 1942 quit India. I mean, Gandhi refused the post-dated blank check. Okay, the Stafford Cripps offered, so it was over. So we are too obsessed with the British period, far too obsessed, and we don't look to our future because we are obsessed with the past. There is nothing left of colonialism. I mean, Africa is different. I have been to many African countries. It's different. Let me not say more about Africa. So please look to the future. The past is post-colonial, studied, write analytical articles about it. I'm all for academics. I'm an academic at heart. But when you talk about today and the future, please don't use the term post-colonial. Let it be us. We are not post-colonials. We are us. And who it is that is us? We are not South Asians. We are Desis. I stopped using the term South Asian because it means nothing. No one feels South Asian. And the so-called South Asians in the 1970s evolved this term Desi outside India because they did not know why they were friendly with each other. They were not friendly with each other because they were post-colonial South Asians. They were friendly with each other because there was something before the colonial period that was us. What is that us? Leave it aside for the moment. So I think of us as Desis. And it gives a very different perspective when you look at it from that point of view. I mean, yes, I mean, you're talking about political scientists, Rudolph's, Myron Wiener. You might have read some. I mean, Rudolph's, my family knew personally. Myron Wiener was at MIT where I was a student. So I know the history of the studies and the interest in India and so on. But what I'm saying is that's not the future, guys. Stop thinking in post-colonial terms. There's nothing colonial in explaining the dilemma in Bangladesh, which you have explained so well. There's nothing post-colonial. Yeah, the colonizer created two countries, but we made three. Okay, so we failed the British because they said, "Oh, we give you two nations," and we said no. India made sure there were three. So where was the colonial rule left in that? Okay. Indira Gandhi said, no, we want three. And they left Sikkim as a country, we took it over. So where is the colony? So the thing is that this is this is an outdated legacy. And I created as a joke the term bib snap to define the seven countries: Bangladesh, India, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan. So seven bib snap, joke, bib snap countries. We are bib snap. And if you want to add Maldives, you can add plus M. And I don't know about Myanmar, but even they are somewhat Desi. But we are Desis. So I'm driving home this point. Stop using this outdated terminology of the 1950s and 60s. Okay. And what is North Asia, by the way? Who studies North Asia? And who studies West Asia? All this obsession with Central Asia and South Asia, I mean, it's just bloody stupid geography. We have some culture which is not South Asia. That's why you see the failure of SARC. You see the failure of the South Asian universities because they're founded on the wrong terminology. As you say, terminology is critical. Okay, so we are not post-colonial anymore. It's over. Yeah, we should study it. I'm not saying we should ignore it or erase it. Yes, we should keep it, do it. But if you look to today and look to the future. So I want young people in India to build contacts, digital contacts, electric contacts with young people throughout the day, throughout with young Desis. I won't say throughout South Asia. I'll say with young Desis. Just as you meet people in college. So when somebody from Pakistan comes on my channel, I say, look, this is not the United Nations. It's not an international organization. You represent yourself, not Pakistan. Just come and tell me about yourself. Oh, sir, you know, and then they say, yeah, my parents were illiterate and they say, I'm here. So it sounds like what happens to my friends. So that is being Desi. Okay, so this is very, I mean, you are the first person I'm telling this to because most people don't understand what you're saying. Okay, but I understand what you're saying. So this is my first point: get rid of post-colonial. And it's good to write papers, write it, but don't think along those lines. Think about how Desis can benefit and get along with each other. I mean, think of Europe after the Second World War. They didn't think we are post-World War II countries. They decided 1952 to form a very tiny economic collaboration. What you call as EU started in 1952 as a way to stop Germany from fighting France. Okay.
Yeah, the European Council of Steel and Coal, I believe.
Oh,
That's
you're
how it
absolutely right.
is.
Yeah. So, okay, so, you and I are talking on the same terms, right? And the second point I want to make is that, which you call as Big Brother, I put it in more diplomatic terms. A big brother we are not, because a big brother in Desi culture leads the younger brother forward. So stop using this term big brother. It's also sounding like colonial big brother or somebody. A big brother in Desi culture leads the younger siblings forward. My oldest brother did. So if I call him big brother, it's a term of praise. So look at it as, and I put it this way, that and I had a chat with the Times of India editor, and he and I agreed that we are gold medalists. We are not leaders in the Desi countries. We are proud of being gold medalists. Oh, man on moon, some device here, this, that here, we go. Software, this, that. But we don't care what's happening in the other countries. We are not leaders. Leaders need to know their followers. We are constantly surprised by what happens in our neighboring countries. We
That's
back
the very true.
Hasina, and then she flies out at night to India. We have no idea that she's going to fly out at night. We have
Mm.
no idea. Now, 71, we were better prepared, we better understood, and we did a good job. Okay? And Sam Manekshaw told Mrs. Gandhi, I'm not going in April 71. You handle it, I'll go in December. Okay. She wanted him to lead the army. He said, no, you handle it, I'll go in December and I'll do the job, which he did. There was a better understanding of the geography. He says, no, it's too rainy. My army can't go into those bloody swamps. So we had a better understanding. But today, as so-called South Asian studies have faded, they've not been replaced by anything building links between the Desi countries. Okay. We need to build better links, better understanding, and at the political level, not continue to be surprised that look what, we think, you read LinkedIn, all the comments are on Gaza. Oh, I'm outraged, I'm this. I ask them what's happening in Bangladesh. Oh, those guys, they are not grateful to us. But do you know what's happening there? Yeah, it's manipulation by some external powers. Okay, fine. This is not the answer, guys. Do you know what is actually happening there? They don't, because we don't have any links to Desi countries, to Desi people. Okay, so this is my, and I'll just say that one more line because you use that sentence. If you ask a Pakistani, he will say, I'm not an Indian, and I'll add to it, and I'm afraid of Hindu India. The identity is that I'm a Pakistani, I'm not an Indian, but I'm afraid of Hindu India. So if the identity of Pakistan, we let them have this national identity, then we can blame them for it, or we can say, what are we doing about it? Why do they
Right.
have this national identity? I mean, you want to form the European Union in 1952. You don't want to tell the French your identities, we are scared of Nazi Germany, right? You want to get over it. So why are we letting them have this identity? That we are not India and we are afraid of Hindu India. Why don't the Bangladeshis, why didn't they have it? So we need to study it from our own perspective. I'm not a scholar at all of anything political science, but I grew up in a family where we talked political science. And so I know many of these terms. I'm just giving to you my thought that please stop saying post-colonial, stop thinking post-colonial, think Desi future. How, you say SARC failed. It's obvious. SARC will fail because there's nothing called South Asia. It's just a term in a geography book. There isn't a, what should I say, cultural concept in the term South Asia. We are Desis. That's why we get along outside India or
We
Pakistan
do.
or whatever
We
country.
famously do.
Huh? I know.
We famously do. And
And the reason we get along is not because we are post-colonial South Asians. We get along because we are Desis. We have something going back 10,000 years, 5,000 years, 3,000, whatever. I don't care. So please, you are a very smart young man. This is my uh, thoughts that I've shared with you. Give up the term post-colonial. It's over. There's nothing colonial left about it. Pakistan, maybe the armies, they still drink alcohol. That's about it. Otherwise, they are Bangladesh. I know Bangladesh reasonably well, but leave that out. So this is my thought to you. Think in joke, think bib snap countries. If you're not bib snap, desi countries. Guy, think about it. Hey, what the heck is this?
I think I agree with this. I mean, that entire query of how diasporas have interacted far better than how we have done in our home territory is a good example for looking towards the future. You know, diasporas, Indian diasporas and Pakistani diasporas so often unite, even Bangladeshi diasporas unite in, say, places like
Wait,
London, where there has been, a lot of violent activities, and yet there has been a Desi overarching culture that has united us all
look,
there. Um,
let me interrupt you. Before Uber, I used to take taxis in Washington, D.C.
hmm,
And sometimes the taxi drivers are Indian, sometimes they're Bangladeshis, sometimes they're Pakistani. Okay. And one fellow told me, Sir, हम तो अफगानियों को भी अपने साथ रखते हैं. Because they don't know how to read all the forms and fill all the documents. We work together. हम तो इकट्ठे हैं. He told me that. I said, bloody heck, this is Desi. What is South Asian? They're not South. They're not feelings. They have not looked up some
hmm,
geography book and say, hey, we are South Asians. And by the way, we are post-colonial. No, they're not. They are going back to something. And so I would say, let's do it this way. Okay. I don't have too much time more to tell you. I'd rather let you talk. I've talked too much. But this is a subject close to my heart that look, young people, please form connections with other Desi
hmm,
people and don't ask them to represent Pakistan or Bangladesh.
hmm,
Just as you go to a college and you say, oh, you're from Goa, I'm from West Bengal. You don't say represent Goa. You're just Goa.
hmm. True.
Right? So don't ask them to be Pakistani. Just ask them to be Desi of a different color, different type.
True. 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 True.
We're all Desis.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, sir. And the future is in looking towards each other in terms that are far more habitual, far more culturally significant to all of us at the same time. And that bridge of unity begins with the cultural affiliations that we have with each other. It's not like we all have so much distinctions that can be overturned with borders. But those cultural familiarities should certainly be utilized to create integration, uh, and that advice of moving away from the post-colonial. Um, Again, I think there's a lot of nuance in what I could have better represented. But yes, the colony is over. But I would say that there are a lot of things that we continue with the colony, because the colony was never one history. It was never one geography. It was a mindset in its own right. And if you just look at how things have shaped up there on, I think a very good book to read is The Amateur. The entire, just a very subtle image of a backbencher in a classroom. The threat to authority that a backbencher is, because he's thinking in different terms from what the class teacher sitting on a podium teaching from a footbill is putting out, is a very interesting thought of how authority itself works. And yes, the colony is gone. The post colony is fading. Uh, the mindset is very different, that still retains within these cultures and societies. Caste may have had its roots in civilizational India, but the politics of census that India inherited is certainly colonial. Certainly, that was created in the colonial society, that has been reinterpreted in the post-colonial, and now we have own versions of our own that we are using to debate in politics. And I wouldn't say that the post-colonial is something that we must continue with, in especially in terms of how South Asia has been seen. And I agree with you completely. The future is to look forward and not to look backwards. But what we have inherited from backwards may be some indication as to how to overcome those hindrances that have been, defying our ability to move forward with a future that is, as you said, a desi culture, a culture that is far more overreaching than borders and boundaries ever were. And that entire sense of having a mindset, Frans Fanon gives a very interesting, beautiful statement. He calls post-colonial to be black skins with white masks. So the white masters may have left, but the brown sahibs still remain. The state of the Indian bureaucracy is a very interesting look at how the colony has continued, and how those colonial attitudes still continue with the that entire culture of having a babu. Better, of course, with e-governance moving everything away from that colonial structure altogether. But nevertheless, that attitude still remains, that an MLA has to be a zamindar. In Pakistan, you have the politicians who are all jagirdars. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the colony has been extinguished, or that the post colony is the way to look at the future, but certainly something that we must identify as a present that continues. But again, the present that continues is neither desirable nor is it appealing for any of us who are young. It is, as you said, Mathu sir, we must move on and see beyond just differences. We are not representing countries, we are just representing our ways of thought, and individually, our individuality has a role to play in this as well. And if we are able to seek a desi culture outside of South Asia, why does South Asia even matter in that case? Why don't we come back and still have that bonhomie, still have that ability to, reach out to cultures across us, understand that there are differences, but there are familiarities and similarities as well. And with those, I would conclude my, response to you.
Okay, it's time to have the final word from you.
I am very thankful.
What are you preaching to the world? What would you like to say?
What am I?
Final word.
Um, I'll say that we are too young to make up our minds, and we will always be too young to make up our minds. And I say, never have a principle that is set in stone. Nothing in this world is permanent, and permanence is the most irrelevant thing you could have ever achieved. And I think I would quote Mahatma Gandhi in saying that consistency is a foolish game. You can never be consistent if you're critical. If you're critical, Be critical towards everything. There is nothing that is set in stone. Continuously question. Keep your mind open, and there are many more things to learn. I think, I think one of a discussion like this gives us a lot of feedback. What Martha sir said is far more future oriented than what I was in the initial understanding of, and I think I'll take back a lot from this discussion itself. And it's especially important that we have discourses. It's especially important that we have conflicts that are interpersonal, so that we come out. As Hegel says, you have and as Greek philosophers would also say, you have a thesis, you have an antithesis, and you have a synthesis. You would come out with something better because everyone knows a little bit more of the truth, and the more truths you gather, you will have a better truth out of it. You might even get to the ultimate truth. But nevertheless, it's very important to not make up your mind and keep your mind open and keep learning from every place, every person that you ever meet.
Okay, thank you so much, Alan. Let's end it here. I'll be back with
Yes.
another young person or an expert soon, or a young expert. And bye, everybody. Stay on, okay?